Talk shoes. Recorded live.
Hello and welcome to Castle of Horror, the show dedicated to horror movies and awesomeness. This week we kick off a series of reviews we've been looking forward to for a while, the Asian Horror Retrospective. Bear in mind, if you haven't seen today's movie, we're going to be talking about it from the perspective of horror fans who have. So warning, spoilers ahead. We will spoil this movie. From Denver, Colorado, I'm your host, Jason Henderson, creator of the Alex Van Helsing novels. With me from Austin is Tony Salvaggio, lead singer of the band Deserts of Mars and co-creator of the comic Psycom from Tokyo Pop and Clockworks from Humanoids. Say hello, Tony.
Howdy.
Tony, you have brought us here, so I expect explanations for you. Also,
sure.
In Austin is Drew Edwards, writer for Rockabilly Online and creator and writer of the long-running comic Halloween Man for Monsterverse Comics. Say hello, Drew.
Howdy.
Howdy. And finally, also joining us from Denver, as always, color commentary from attorney Julia Guzman. Say hello.
Hello.
Okay. According to Wikipedia, Rigor Mortis. Rigor Mortis, a movie I had not heard of until Tony said, we are starting an Asian horror retrospective, and I suggest we start with this. Rigor Mortis is a 2013 Hong Kong horror film directed by Juno Mock and produced by Takashi Shimizu. The film is a tribute to the Mr. Vampire film series, which we will be getting to. Many of the former cast are featured in this film. Chin Siu-hou, Anthony Chan, Billy Lau, Richard Ng. Additionally, Chung Fat, who starred in Encounters of the Spooky Kind, is also featured. We're going to get into what this movie is about, but basically, it is about bringing the concepts of the old, and I should say old, it's from the 80s, but the original Mr. Vampire series and Chinese ghost story kind of stuff into a very contemporary setting. So let's start with opening thoughts, and let's start with Tony, and because, Tony, you're kind of our host for the next couple of weeks. We're going to put ourselves into your hands. I think eventually there is a series, surely, probably, that Drew can drag us through, that we will have no idea what's going on, and Drew, you can think about what that will be. But this time it's Tony. You are our Virgil. So what is going on in Rigor Mortis? Why are we watching this movie?
So originally we'd planned to watch Mr. Vampire so that we could lead into this one, but it proved harder than we thought to find a copy, so we're trying to remedy that. But I like this movie because it's a trip down memory lane. Like, you see all these actors that I haven't seen in, Chinese horror in a long time. And I got to see this at Fantastic Fest, and it was a real treat. Although I really hate the ending, but we can talk about that. I always tell people to just there's one scene, just stop and pretend that was where you ended it. And I think for me, that's a better ending. But I really enjoyed it. I think it's strange because it's a more brutal and I would say a more deliberate film than the Mr. Vampire series in general, especially the really kind of comedic, like happier, Chinese vampire movies where there's a kid vampire and all this stuff. But I really like this movie, and I liked it more this time, even though I hated the ending.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And by the way, I think there's a lot of movies where you could shut off the film 5 minutes early and have a perfect film. And we'll take an opportunity to talk later and see how do you grade? How do you grade on that? Does a film fail if the ending? It's a very, very, very ending. The epilogue is terrible. Does the whole film fail, or do we figure out some way to give it a grade anyway? All right. Let's go Julia and then Drew, and then I'll go. Julia, Rigor Mortis, I don't even know how familiar you are with Chinese horror. I don't know if you've ever seen Mr. Vampire, and I don't know if you've seen Chinese Ghost Story. I know you saw Legend of the Seven Golden Vampires. So how does this roll with you?
I thought it was really cool looking. I think it's really interesting. Just the imagery, I had never seen anything like most of what was in there. It's very inventive. There's just, that's the thing about that I always admire about Jason and a lot of other folks is that you guys have this capacity to imagine entirely different universes, which I don't have that. I'm not super left-brained, but I'm not that right-brained. I'm like pretty centered. And so this is that kind of thing where you're just like, how did that even come into your brain? Like, how did you see that and then make it happen? So, I thought it was really cool.
Very cool. Drew, what are your thoughts, Rigor Mortis?
I'm going to be the dissenting voice here. I had a very, very hard time getting through this movie. I thought it was really boring. Despite having some really, really beautiful images, and I would say visually it is a very nice-looking film, the special effects, even the CGI effects, which I normally am not a fan of, were very well done. And, there were some good performances from the cast, but, I found myself kept falling this. I had to really work to get through this movie. I just found it to be very, very, very dull. And
it's not even that long a movie. It's only about 100 minutes long. It was a struggle for me, and maybe it's because I haven't seen any of the Mr. Vampire movies. That's part
of my theory, actually.
Maybe it would have hit some more right notes, but as a standalone movie, I can't go in because I can't retroactively, install all those movies into my brain. I have to review this based off of my first experience, and I found it kind of dull. Although I was not bothered by the occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge riff on the very end. I actually felt like that made the rest of the movie work a little better for me, even though it is a cliche.
It is, boy, and thank you for pointing out that it goes all the way back to the occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge. What I thought about this movie is I was really intrigued. First of all, it's not a very long movie, so it's only 100 minutes, which is kind of a perfect length for something like this. I thought it reminded me actually of a lot of Japanese, especially anime, like Boogie Pop Phantom and stuff like that, where the whole mood is very sort of just romantically sad. The basic idea in this movie is that this depressed actor moves into what has to be the most singularly depressing apartment building ever invented. It's this enormous, huge, probably 17-story building with an enormous atrium in the center. It's all gray, and there's 20 people living in it. It is this, and everybody just talks slowly, and it's very sad. And I make it sound like a boring movie, but that's not it. To me, the movie really, it sets a okay, Drew thought it was boring. I did not find it to be boring. I found it to be, to me, there was something entrancing about the mood going on. But at the same time,
if by entrancing you mean lulls you to sleep, then yes.
Remember we did this.
All right. This is where we're gonna have to separate. There's a difference between paced and deliberate, and to you it was boring, but seriously, man, there's so much crap that happens. I don't you may have thought it was boring, and when you watched it, you may have thought it was boring, but it is. I am gonna have to call you on just constantly it's the sleepiest movie ever.
Ever, but the sleepiest movie I've seen all week.
I think Drew is riffing on my pointing out that at least at the beginning, the movie has this very, very sort of, because it's very mournful. The father, we begin, with a father moving in, and dealing with the loss of his family for reasons that we completely don't understand. And I have to say, even watching this movie, half the time I was still going, oh, wait a minute, who's that person and why are they doing this?
Yeah,
and who's that?
That was a little confusing.
One of three nearly, there's three nearly identical women with skinny faces and long brown hair, and it's difficult.
Yeah. I'll go with that.
But at the same time, once the vampires start hopping around and crazy shit starts going down with ghosts and then by the time you get to the end, you're in a whole sequence that feels like a riff on the crazy action of like Sweetheart and
now,
stuff like that.
Yeah,
I
Jason
will have
can attest that I fall asleep in every movie, and I did not fall asleep in this movie. I thought it was very exciting.
I will have to say that one thing I can kind of, I thought about a lot. This is my third time seeing it. Is there's a lot of stuff in here that is extremely intrinsically Chinese culture, as well as Chinese ghost story and supernatural stuff. And I have studied it like a decent amount. And I'm by no means, I know guys who have stayed in China, like they know this like the back of their hand. But even like watching it, I will have to say that there's a lot in it that I feel like I'm missing chunks. And
like
if
you're
I
just barely
like,
grabbing at it as it goes
well,
on.
There's a bunch of pieces where they're very culturally specific. Like there's stuff I know, like I kind of, there's bits that I know I'm missing, and there's a lot to grasp. And I've watched a lot of these and actually, asked like friends of mine from China, friends of mine from Hong Kong about certain things. And so I know more than a lot of people. I'm not saying I'm an expert by any stretch, but like the things I know, and then watching it and going, man, I still feel like I'm missing like at least a quarter of just the little bits. It's like trying to explain something that's like in the deep South, and just all the things that you take for granted. Like somebody who's, like if I had a friend visiting from China and we saw some movie and it had all these things, and we all take it for granted, like all these little cultural bits that I still feel like these movies, like this movie especially, I think had a lot of pieces that I think not everybody's going to catch. And
don't you think they probably also? I mean, we're dealing with Chinese ghosts and Chinese vampires and their own folklore on this, and since we're not as inundated with it, of course we're going to take whatever is said in the movie is that that's the folklore. But they probably also change it the same way we do with Western vampires and ghosts and werewolves and whatever.
Well, it's like the movie that's riffing on both, like whatever werewolf myth there is out there, plus whatever you've learned from Universal horror.
Exactly.
So,
and there's also, the reason that they hop is because in Legend they kind of flew in a way.
Okay, back up. You got to
kind of show that. So part of the reason it's called rigor mortis is Chinese vampires hop in the movies. They have rigor mortis. They can't move that well. They also chase you by smell, the smell of your breath. And so to show them, and in sometimes they use more wire work in the movies to make them kind of hover more, but they, that whole thing of them hopping became kind of a, as legend and how you saw it. But then when they started showing it in movies, they have this traditional kind of hop, and then when they really need to get somewhere, they have this like wire work hop. It's like takes them really far. They have long fingernails. There's a lot more comedy in the original Mr. Vampire movies. This one, the vampire's really brutal, and the ghosts are really brutal. All of it's very, and they make a lot of choices, and they do like really, really desaturate it. What's funny is they desaturate it to gray instead of the traditional, like we're going to desaturate it towards blue.
Yeah.
And I think because of that, I think it means that, well, there's not a lot of this very typical thing, especially in Hollywood, where you see blue and then you see orange to contrast because that's the complementary color. And it just nowadays they just nail you right in the eyes with that blue-orange. Avatar is like the prime suspect for that. You'll see all this blue and then you'll see highlights of orange here and there, but it happens all over the place. In this, they do this really desaturated thing so that all the little bits, especially of blood, are just like glowing red. And I think that's kind of it's a different thing. It's not necessarily better or worse or whatever, but I thought it was interesting that they really went gray instead of kind of more traditional blue that you see a lot of times in the color palette. And I'm not a big fan of a lot of the CG. I still think it looks really CG. Like,
I actually think the CG was all right in this, and I'm not especially a fan. I thought I thought the effects in this were, I thought the way the various monsters were presented were actually the highlight of the movie to me. I thought the creatures themselves look great.
Right. And
why don't we start with well, before we go too far down, this movie only really has like 5 sections if you don't count the epilogue, which we may. So I think we should just go through the movie and then call out what's working and what isn't in different parts. Okay, the movie begins with the
ending.
Right. Well, okay. All right. Well, let's ignore that. Let's get past the fact that it begins with the ending. The movie begins. So you're exactly right, but it's going to be a little too difficult to describe. We are told at the very beginning that this is a flashback, and the movie begins with a man named Chin, who is an actor who is basically his career is over. He's not very old. I mean, he seems to be, in his 30s. If he can't be much older than that, maybe 40s. And he's moving into a very, very dilapidated apartment building. And right away, things are very, very strange because, as Tony talked about, it's very gray. You can hear the wind moving through it all the time. It's a giant apartment building that seems to be crumbling. Everybody has like security gates in front of each door, and they're all rusted. And I think it's really hilarious. He moves into this apartment. The superintendent security dude who lets him into the apartment immediately goes, what I like to do when I let somebody in is I let's perform a ritual. Here,
a Buddhist clearing.
And here, why don't you get started with this? And he starts just sort of swinging, and it's a ritual, incense. But you really sense his sort of urgency in shouting at the walls and going, okay, don't do nothing crazy, all right. And that's great because you know that you're...
He lights a bunch of incense, sticks it into the door.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
by the way, he goes into 242, which can be backwards, but also 4 is a bad number. It's the same way that there might not be a 4th floor on...
it's like 13 for us.
Yeah. And so, but it makes 4, and 2 plus 2 is 4. But it's also so like I said, there's a lot of those kind of bits where you're like, oh, so so there's stuff like that that's just kind of like, oh man, that is very unlucky.
And I never would have known that in a million years. And there'll be a thing later on where everybody does a particular action where I'm like, how do they know to do that? Now, I bet if I were Chinese and watching this, I would also know what the hell they're doing.
Like the number 4 C is similar to the word for death. So, and I'm sure I'm not pronouncing that quite right because there's a lot of nuance to Chinese. But it's because 4 sounds similar. The word for 4 sounds similar to death, which really fits. And so the 2442 on the door
it's
actually
like double death.
Is an omen. Yeah.
Triple death. Yeah.
Sure, it's like having the dead man's hand room.
Yeah.
He so immediately Chin says, okay, sayonara, old man, closes the door, feels depressed because we learn a little bit of his story, which is, and I don't mind spoiling the whole thing all the way through, never completely makes sense to me. He clearly had a wife and he had a son and they're no longer in his life, and he plays the recordings over and over again of remembering them, but it's never made clear to us, is the son dead?
Well, they seem to be dead because he has a vision, again with the art, the artistic, he has a vision or a dream or whatever where they're all sitting at the table together and then suddenly blood just comes out of them. So they're clearly dead.
So he's more, so whether, there's plenty of room even as you're watching it to go, well, look, he is mourning these people whether they are truly dead or not, because the movie's not telling us, but anyway, he hangs himself. And no sooner does that happen than ghosts, who in this movie are shown to be, white-shrouded women, in this case they're women, white-shrouded women who are surrounded by these sort of ethereal tangles of plasma that just kind of float, and they grab onto his body as he's hanging himself from the fan, and they enter his body. And at just that moment, a flying demon hunter enters the apartment, to cut him down.
And he's dramatically. I really don't believe personally, and I would love to hear from actually somebody who knows about this, that he wouldn't have died in the time that he was hanging. Because
all right, so that's the question. Did
he's violently twitching. So
no,
I
part
feel
of
like
it is
he died.
the ghost lift him up as well. Like before that guy flies in, he's being like lifted and twisted by the ghost. I mean, it's kind of nebulous. I mean, it's done definitely for dramatic effect. I'm not saying that he wouldn't have, but like in general,
usually they just break their necks as soon as they.
I think they're thinking a little hard about this movie that involves a flying.
That it's completely realistic.
No. But it's important. It feels important that he seems to be, in the words of the Princess Bride, mostly dead.
Mostly dead.
And then he, the demon hunter, who calls himself in the subtitles a vampire hunter, but he's a demon hunter, comes in and saves him and fights the ghosts and gets them out of the way. And the demon hunter is this like grumbly, skinny, older man with great big glasses. And
he dresses like the dude in The Big Lebowski.
Chen Yao.
Yes.
The character's name is Chen Yao, apparently.
Yeah, and he works in the restaurant, and which is, there's really only two businesses in this building. There's a restaurant and there's a seamstress. And, and there's also an apothecary guy.
Oh, and apparently the guy who tries to kill himself, by the way, was a famous actor at some point.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
No, like I said,
and one can assume that he was in these kind of films. That's kind of the conceit.
That's funny. I didn't get that, but I totally will.
Yeah.
Well, if you look at his robe, when the costumes that he had, he was at least in period pieces.
Yeah.
But the costumes he had could very easily fit in, these kind of roles.
No, you're absolutely right. They look like something out of like Mr. Vampire, they look like something out of Chinese Ghost Story, actually.
Sure.
Because Mr. Vampire is 80s and everybody's wearing leotards and leg warmers, but
not in the first Mr. Vampire.
Oh, okay.
You're thinking like Mr. Vampire 2, and eventually it's very 80s. I mean, it's 80s kids hanging out. And, yeah.
So was the first Mr. Vampire a period piece?
It's kind of. I need to double check if it's supposed to be period. It's definitely like in a village, so like everybody's closer to kind of the kung fu movies we think of. But
yes,
I don't know how modern it exactly was supposed to be.
So anyway, we meet the vampire hunter and or the demon hunter, and so he says, okay, well, I saved your life just this once. And they have
how is he not a vampire hunter? I mean, he fights the ghosts here, but I mean, he definitely, anytime he even talks about how, like, he's not a vampire hunter anymore because all the vampires, for some reason, disappeared.
That's right, but I've also seen referenced that he uses tools for I think the word was Yangshi, which are demons to my knowledge. I mean, he's like a character out of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I mean, he's like
he knows how to take care of ghosts and stuff too.
Well,
but
Buffy,
I think his
called her Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and she hunts all kinds of things.
That is absolutely correct.
His profession is vampire hunter. He knows how to deal with supernatural. I think is kind of how really it plays out.
Yeah, and he knows all this stuff.
Yeah.
So that's our beginning. We after Chin tries to kill himself and that doesn't work out, he now knows there are ghosts in his apartment. There's a demon hunter down the hall, and there's also this noodle place. So he goes there and he meets the seamstress lady who cares for him, and various of the neighbors. And the next very strange thing that happens is he spots a couple of characters that I honestly thought were ghosts when they first appeared. And this is something that might be kind of negative about this movie, which is that at times there are so many ghosts going around that even the living people, you get the impression they may in fact be dead. I know that you're not supposed to think they're literally the living dead, but you get the impression that everybody here could be dead. This could be purgatory.
That's kind of part of what makes it what it is. That's how far out in this village and just this dilapidated. In fact, there's little clues, and I don't know if it's too literal a translation, where the woman, when she's talking to, and I guess eventually we'll get to it, her husband's killed, and she decides to bring him back. She's talking to him. She says, there's only two of us. And I think they really meant there's only us two, as in she and him, together. but it could also, depending on how you took it, like most of the people there could be dead. It could just be her and the vampire hunter, as far as we know, you know.
I mean, and in fact, the vampire hunter has a conversation with the cook at the restaurant, and he goes, okay, so-and-so, the guy goes, hey, you're late. And he goes, look, I know everything everybody's going to order. He's going to get this, he's going to get that, you know, and Mrs. So-and-so is going to to get this. And the guy goes,
right.
She died last week. And he goes, yeah, she's still going to come in and eat. You know,
she still has to eat, yeah.
and yeah, we also find out that he cooks glutinous rice, but he's tied to it because it's one of the many tools of the vampire hunters.
Yeah, that's definitely a conceit. There's various things. In fact, it really comes into play in Mr. Vampire in a kind of funny, you know, way, but also like it's part of vampire hunting. I don't want to give that away.
I don't remember the rice other than that. Throw rice down, they got to stop and count it, that kind of stuff.
Well, that's European vampires. It could be something completely different for Chinese vampires.
It could be. I don't even know. I do remember one thing that's used a lot in Mr. Vampire and also Chinese Ghost Story is spells are on paper, and that's in this movie as well. You know, spells are written down on a sheet of paper and then pasted somewhere or dropped somewhere, or in the case of a sort of freezing spell, you'd lick it and stick it to the forehead of a demon that you want to freeze, and it'll work until it blows off. Lovely stuff. I mean, this is all so it's all so stagey in a sense, you know, concepts like that. And I love the fact that this movie keeps this constant mood of presenting these utterly absurd things as though they are completely understandable, you know, and it's which I really like. Okay, so anyway, I mentioned these characters that I thought might be ghosts. There's a mom and her little albino child who are running around.
He's fantastic. I mean, he steals his name is Tack. He steals the show.
Yeah, there's this wiry little white-haired kid who is running around, and basically the whole building, you come to find out the whole building watches out for them.
Yeah.
But at first you think I thought they were ghosts. I wasn't even sure if they were really there.
Well, you know, it's like, again, what we were saying, who knows, maybe they're not. But yeah, so the mom witnessed an awful, horrible crime, and so that she's kind of crazy now, and they just sort of live off the kindness of strangers, basically. Or not strangers, but neighbors.
So has anybody seen, this is not a trick question, I'm not asking because I know the answer, but this sounds very familiar, this notion of, hey, you see that person over there wandering the streets, they have a backstory, now we all sort of take care of them. I hear that thought device, and first of all, it makes me really happy. There's just something sort of perfect about it. It feels like something Stephen King might have come up with, you know, and you know, it that has a classic literature element to it. The idea of these sort of mainstays. Oh well, there's the character in Our Town, who's the town drunk, but you get the impression he has a past with all the characters, and he wanders around.
Yeah, I mean, in villages, and especially in small, I mean, this is a tiny community. You know, there's, especially because of what happens, it's so tragic. I mean, her, you know, once you find out about the ghost, you know, it was her husband who was taking advantage, you know, tried to rape, or may have already in the past raped. Well, I mean, like even before we see the sequence, you know, this girl, her
two girls. So he tutors.
No, well, her sister kills him, and because her sister also dies because she, you know, looks like accidentally stabbed herself as she was killing the guy. She killed herself. So now you have two dead twins, and you know this woman has a kid still, and she is crazy, and she's taking the, you know, she makes it a habit of taking the sacrificial food that's being placed around where these people have died and actually getting it for herself and her son, you which is taboo, but they kind of just let her do it because, what else are you going to do?
So, I don't know if, just in case it wasn't clear what the crime was exactly, because I'm not sure that was completely clear. He tutored the twins. He rapes one, the other one while he's raping her, and it's brutal rape. I mean, he puts a dagger through her hand to keep her in place.
Yeah,
and so the other girl, this twin sister, attacks him and stabs him through with, I guess, very long shears that go all the way through him and into her, and so she kills herself. So then the other girl, that's when, like you said, she hangs herself, and this is all in the apartment of this little family, the husband, the wife, and their baby. And so when the wife comes home, this is the scene that she's greeted with, and so now it's her and the baby having to be in the building but not wanting to be in that place, and so they just go up. And so finally, at one point in the movie, they actually do return to the apartment to sort of face that, that fear.
Well, it's the apartment that Chin has moved into.
But I'm saying they returned to his apartment.
Yes. Right, and so one thing I think is really interesting here, and it's going to play out again with the other supernaturally affected characters, which is that stuff happens to your family and it affects you. So, this husband was a rapist and a murderer, and so now his widow wanders the halls like the living dead with her son, and they are poisoned by the evil that he did. There's something that they cannot connect completely to this society, and I think there's something very folkloric about that, and probably something a little more Eastern than Western about that concept, than our extremely individualistic Western concept. You can see a notion that the shame here might have rubbed off and poisoned her, so that she wanders. And at the same time, the other strange couple, you find out the seamstress is married to an old man, and they're getting very old. And the old man,
she's one of the most wonderful characters in the whole movie. She's amazing.
Very interesting character. So the old lady, she is doing her seamstress thing.
Auntie Mui, or however they pronounce it.
Yes. Mui. So her husband basically goes out, and she has a vision that something bad happens. And in fact, what happened was he was distracted by the boy playing on the stairs.
No, that's not the boy. That's not the little albino kid. That's a ghost kid, I think.
Was it?
Yeah.
You're right.
The necromancer, who you kind of don't know, he kind of ends up, they've been rivals / kind of opposite numbers, it turns out, to the vampire hunter. That's, for whatever reason, he has kept these ghost kids around, I guess, because he's, his black magic. That's what he does.
Right.
Yeah, remember the kid eats the candy at one point?
Yeah.
Okay,
yes. Anyway, so so the old man is distracted by a ghost kid, and he falls and breaks his neck. And then the necromancer, for reasons shown later in flashback, but I never did quite get the reason, the necromancer drags the old man up even higher and lets him fall a long way, so he's well and truly dead. I don't know what the deal was with that.
No, that's when he got distracted then and killed him so that he wanted to bring him back so he could lure
he was only mostly dead.
Yeah, so
he
could lure
the totally dead.
Well, anyway, as soon as that old man is dead, Auntie Mui wants him to come back to life, and this begins really one of the most interesting the vampire part of this movie is actually not very much of the movie. I mean, there's a lot of it, but this is very interesting because she's like, I want him to come back to life. Well, the only way for that to happen is for him to be a vampire.
Well, but the thing is, okay, so I don't know that was necessarily the plan, because I think the mask was intended because the necromancer says he has to wear this coin mask, and what I was reading was that the coins were supposed to keep the evil away. So it's not necessarily supposed to be a vampire, but rather just come back from the dead.
Sort of a shambling.
Her taking off the mask is what makes him then be a vampire.
Yeah.
Also remember that part of why he's trying to, and why he's got the children ghost, etc., is he has various things. He's got cancer, And so by doing all this black magic and through, drinking the blood of children or smoke, I guess, turning it into stuff he can smoke and getting all this power, he's trying to prolong his life, basically.
Yeah, that was unclear to me, but I mean, it makes sense when you're saying it, but I didn't get that. I didn't understand.
Yeah, that's his kind of his deal and why he's got the children around. And there's again a lot that's veiled, and there's also little bits that you do have to really pay attention to, and especially like bits that if you're not familiar with some of this, you may not catch. Like I said.
Yeah, plot-wise, it's really hard for a Westerner.
But he, that's part of his whole deal is he's doing a lot of things to help keep himself alive through getting spirits and what he turning various blood-related things into smoke that he can smoke that. And,
right, including
he's upping the ante each time too to try to keep this going.
So anyway, he does this favor for Auntie Mooney, and it involves. So let's tell her whole plot right now instead of like going chronologically, because this is really key for the whole film. Okay. He gives her like advice on what's going to be required to bring the old man back.
Yeah, putting him in soil in the bathtub and then standing him up with this mask on, and
it's not working. He's not coming back.
And it's days and days, yeah.
And so he says, okay, well, you're going to need the blood
of a virgin,
of a child, blood of a virgin, yes.
Yeah.
And so ultimately, what that requires is that she will have to sacrifice, and this is horrible because it
is the most gruesome thing, and they don't even show it, but it's so horrific.
Right. She has to, and that's what's brilliant here is that, when you think about it, a vampire, the whole concept of the vampire is that it has to kill it. If for a vampire to be evil and scary, then innocent people have to die. And in a lot of movies, the innocent people who die are still really annoying, so we don't mind them dying. And that's the sort of little trick that horror movies do a lot.
But in this case, she is in her apartment, and for some reason, the little albino boy, and the demon hunter guy come, like the little albino boy goes over to her house, her apartment, and she's like, the demon hunter's like, I'm sorry, he's bothering you, because she says that her husband's sick, and she's like, it's fine, he's just a child, and he runs in, so the demon hunter kind of just goes away, and so now the kid's inside of her apartment. And at one point he says he needs to go to the bathroom, and so she's like, okay, this is it, I've committed, because that's where her husband is. And so she opens the door to the bathroom, and the little boy goes in and then sees this, whatever he sees, which we're not exactly clear.
Well, he's a vampire. He's tall and he has long nails.
But we have never seen what he actually. Well, we haven't seen yet what he actually looks like at that point, I don't think.
Yeah.
Then he just starts whimpering and whining, and she closes the door, and then it's this horrific just banging, like we're against the door, and she's just kind of like, she's just become this, completely unfeeling, somewhat evil person at this point, because she's so driven by this need to be with her husband in some form.
Right, and the need to bring back your spouse, of course, is, when you think about it, a horrible. It's
addiction. I like to make everything into addiction. It's an addiction that's at this point that she's got.
It's a horrible human need to have people that you love be with you, and at the same time, it is a profound disgrace and a profound sin to actually ask for more time. Mm-hmm. Because more time is the one thing that none of us are allowed, and so when she is willing to sacrifice a child in order to get more time with an old man, there is no saving her soul, really. Right. And that's interesting. Although when we finally get to the very, very end of the film, before what it turned out, it looked to me as though it was going to be a very Buddhist concept that, nevertheless, in the afterlife, all souls begin to just sort of seep away, and everybody becomes equal again. Mm-hmm. But that's not actually where it went.
And let me tell you one thing that I did read. That is, at one point, Chin, the actor, is the guy who tried to commit suicide, is in the hall with the mother of the little boy.
Yes.
And these
Okay, what the heck was that?
So I found an answer to that, and maybe Tony knows more about it. But apparently, these guys that walk by, these figures that walk by with these umbrellas, these parasols, walk by in the hall, and she's like, "Look away, don't look." Well, they both know to look away. They just already know.
Right.
They're soul collectors, and what they do is 7 days after someone dies, they arrive to collect the souls, and they use the umbrellas to trap these wandering souls.
Oh my!
And so the idea is that I guess they were there supposed to be getting the husband of this woman, but they didn't because he's they've used the black magic or whatever. So anyway, so that was a really interesting little piece where you're just kind of like, what the hell's going on?
Yeah, the kind of parade aspect of it is really cool, and I really like the way they shot that. Like, it's so imposing. Like, they make them super tall. And it's really, really cool.
Like 7 or 8 feet tall.
Yeah. Oh, it's amazing. And that's the moment when, you're really living in just symbols, because that's absurd. And I kept thinking, if this were so the negative is, as Drew points out, it can be very tiresome. It's like, oh God, here's one more thing that I don't know what this is, and I'm going to
No. That is like, don't turn this into an East-West thing. That is not why.
No, I'm not saying it's East-West. I'm saying it's one unexplained thing after another.
Okay, that's like, it's not that I was unfamiliar with the lore. It's that you're right. It became tedium to me after a while because none of this stuff's connected well enough. And in a way, ultimately, that was what was disappointing, because, the main theme of this movie is mourning and loss, and that's something I can definitely, relate to, and, certainly have in the past of other movies that we've done with similar themes in this, but I just never connected with any of this on an emotional level, so it's just this kind of like a string of admittedly sometimes cool visuals that I just still left me feeling kind of meh.
Yeah, no, I'm with you, and what I'm saying is, and also it can depend on how you feel at the moment, and do you feel like struggling with this? I mean, for instance, you can't look away and take notes when you're watching a movie like this, because you have to be reading the subtitles the whole time. I mean, there's just all this crap that it requires, and especially in this case. There's a lot of disconnected things that you aren't familiar with. But anyway, very, very quickly we move into the final sequence of this, which is a team-up. The vampire hunter and the actor team up, and now that there is a full-fledged hopping vampire running around, and they're going to face off against him, and this begins one of the most ingenious things I've ever seen, which is that Tony, tell me if I say this correctly, but the vampire hunter has a sort of wooden puzzle that bestows power as blood that he sheds.
Well, it's also built in, like, it's, Chinese, what do you call it? It's related to I Ching and Chinese symbolism. I'm drawing a blank. But it's a whole thing built around, like, the earth, water, fire, metal, which is often represented as gold. But you have to twist it, and it's got spikes. So as he bleeds, he literally bleeds for trying to help. Now, also, mind you, our actor friend has been impaled by the vampire who ripped down a thing, so he's actually dying. And he says, hey, save me. I have to fight the vampire. He's like, well, okay, I can do this, but you have the length of a cigarette burning once everything goes down. And then it's all over. Like, you're giving up your soul, you're giving up your life. Like,
so that's
as long as
you have. You got a 7-minute timer. You got the 7-minute timer. You got the actor now infused with extra power because he's been
also the vampires now become a super vampire because the twin ghosts are inside.
Yeah. That was the whole point. Is the twin ghosts were.
Okay, explain that to me. I'm with this whole thing that there's going to be more power going to the demon hunter, because as he sheds more blood and twists more and more, he opens up more concentric circles of power on this disc, and that so he's able to keep fighting. But these two partners, one standing at the shield and the other doing the actual fighting. Fine. Why do the two ghosts of the women who were raped and killed? Why do they take over the vampire and start fighting the good guys? That doesn't make any sense.
Well, it's that they were already, because the conceit from the warlock, the necromancer, is that they're really powerful. He needs more and more to kind of keep himself alive. So when the vampire comes out, he basically absorbs. It's like everything evil around him just kind of absorbs into him. It's kind of the more or less the takeaway. So he's now infused with all the evil that's around, in addition to, just the fact he was summoned or, transmuted, and then he's killed his kid, so he's even more powerful. And so it's kind of the conglomeration of...
this notion, so I get it. I've seen it before in various lore that's, hey, good person gets killed, they come back as an evil ghost and they try to drown you, even though their spirit would not approve of that. You'd think that these twins who died in this terrible way would instead try to help, but they don't. They're not on that side anymore. They're now on the side of evil, and it's just interesting and dark. But yes,
maybe because they died in horrible ways, they're angry ghosts.
I think that's right. I think that's exactly right. And so yes, super vampire versus power infused actor, and and they're doing kung fu and lots of wire fu, and they're throwing one. And this is 2015, so they're throwing one another through brick walls and doing all kinds of like groovy.
And as he unlocks each element, it changes. Yeah. So there's as he unlocks wood, vines wrap around the vampire. As he unlocks earth, the concrete actually turns into soup, a gray soup, which again goes back to the desaturated kind of palette. That now they're fighting. They do some great cinematography too, where the vampire is underwater to show all the flowing, and then same thing within the kind of cement soup that it becomes. And it's even greater because the vampire hunter actually, in twisting, you give of yourself as you're doing this sacrifice. He actually twists his arm off, trying to help our hero.
And
turning.
That was so gross.
But they can't both. See, that's why you need two people to do this, because you couldn't both be fighting and also be unlocking the power on the shield. You have to have one unlocking the power while the other does the fighting. It was brilliant. And yes, he twists his arm off. That is astonishing. And then
and there's no yelling in this movie. Have you noticed that? Nobody screams out in pain ever.
Yeah, that's because
they get a little heated, but there's no like
they're so afraid. And of course, finally, we end up going all the way back to the first moments of the film, where, as Julia was alluding to, we saw them all lying at the bottom of this atrium. They all fall together from the top of the building down to the bottom of the atrium, which is this enormous stone garden, essentially. And the vampire is highly damaged, and so he, while the two heroes die just from their mortal wounds, the vampire is literally burning up, and it's well animated.
Because he turns it to fire. Fire being the final element.
Right then, when we see the vampire burning up, I'm like, whatever happened to his wife? And suddenly she appears out of the darkness. Yeah. I'm like, oh, there she is.
Yeah,
right.
She cuts her own throat.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Anti-movie.
Yeah.
She says, hey, let's go. Let's go together. Finally, she
and she's done such evil things, but in the end, this is reminding us that we're all good and bad. We're all yin and yang. And so she cuts her throat. She dies with this husband that she was breaking taboos to try to bring back, and that's the end. And I think that at that point you pop out the Blu-ray and you go out for some yogurt, because
for me that's the end.
See, I feel like the meandering...
The pan over where, like, you know, and the Vampire Hunter guy, he's, you know, stoically smoking a cigarette, as one does if you're an Asian star. You know? But, yeah, that's where I was, like, when I saw it the first time especially, I was like, why did I leave the theater right then? Why didn't I...
Okay, go ahead, Drew.
The sort of, you know, everything in the kitchen sink attitude that this movie has makes way more sense if you view it as the death dream of a man.
Because what
the lights going out in this guy's brain.
Possibly, except that way more everything in the kitchen sink has happened in many other Chinese ghost stories and encounters with kind and like all of that. Like, yeah, I think to me that ending is one of the crappiest. Like, I'm not saying it's not a cliche.
It's been done a bazillion times, and you know, if a movie earns that ending, and I'm not saying this one did. If a movie earns that, but if a movie does earn that ending, then I'll give it a pass, even though it's a cliche. And
all right, explain it, but we've only referred to it, but nobody's explained it. Drew, you want to tell us what happens next?
Well, there's a famous short story called An Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge, where a guy's about to be executed, and he escapes, and he, if I remember correctly, it's been a dog's age since I've read it or even seen the popular Twilight Zone episode. The guy rushes back to where to the woman he loves, and right as he gets to her, that's when his neck snapped, because the whole thing's just been a fantasy in his head as he's about to be hung or shot. I can't remember if he's hung or shot, but he's hung. That's the general. He's hung.
Hung off a bridge.
Yeah, and it has been done ever since then. It's been done a bazillion times. Like I said, it was made into a very famous Twilight Zone episode, and then, you know, everybody and their brother has ripped it off. It's not just this movie. It's thousands of things. I didn't mind it here. I mean, I get where Tony is coming from. You know, I mean, maybe if I held the rest of the movie in higher esteem, it would bother me more. But,
so what we do get,
it's very strange, because not only
goes back to the apartment. He actually hangs himself. We see people who are having a much better time than they had in the previous life. Like, things don't seem to be so bleak. It's a brighter gray. And
the apartment
his son is alive.
Nicer,
it's a different shade of gray.
Yeah, his son identifies him at the end. Like, when they pull
the older son, who's an older son.
Who's an older son, yeah.
Which I thought was an interesting detail, actually. Mm-hmm. But, you know, like I said, it is ultra cliche. It didn't bother me. You know, and like I said, something about it like makes the rest of the movie actually congeal a little better for me than if, you know, it's like, maybe if I liked the rest of the movie better, I'd be like, if only you had it, I'd be doing the exact same thing you were doing. It's like, that cliche ending.
Well, I just think it's kind of just crummy. Like, to me, like, it just negates, like, hey, you've done all this stuff. At least it's not as bad as that John Cusack movie where you find out everything's like that, like, 3/4 of the way through, and you're spending the rest of the quarter going, why the hell do I care at all?
Yeah.
Motel, something.
No, I didn't like it at all.
Maybe just, I don't even know why I finished watching that movie, because it was just the most, I hated it so much.
Which one are you thinking of?
The one, John Cusack and a bunch of people meet
at
a roadside motel.
1408?
No, they meet about Identity. It's called, if I recall, that's called Identity.
Yeah, they meet at a roadside motel, and then you find out something most of the way through the movie.
There was an era in Hollywood of brains and bats endings where movies would turn out that everything you watched was actually, you know, a dream or a vision or a scam or a whatever, you know. And I know.
I think the problem with genre movies, more often than not, that kind of thinking is done as a way of like, oh, I can't really handle the possibility of the supernatural, so I have to somehow show it was all all bunk or a dream or.
Yeah,
That's not just in horror movies. It's also in like look at all the sitcoms that have been.
No, they do it. They do it a lot. They do it. I know. I'm not saying they do, but I'm saying specifically when this sort of thing is used in horror films, it is usually used as a way to write off supernatural, the supernatural, which is of course pisses off horror fans because horror fans usually like the supernatural.
That's true.
Well, I've seen a lot where it's like it just feels lazy. Like, well, I painted myself in a corner. It's a dream. It's like, wow, really? So you just couldn't commit to like this way or that way. It had to be a dream to like wrap it all up. It's crap. That's my opinion. I'm sticking to it.
No, and I also believe, so this is actually more interesting than whether you like this ending. Because I think we all, Drew likes it, the three of us don't like it.
I like it better than the three of you. Let's not go crazy.
All right, here is my, and I actually felt this way about The Mist. I thought that the most of The Mist was a fun, sort of crazy, ultra-violent comic book, and then the ending was a real bummer, and it brings you down, and I was like, I wish I could have just shut it out when they were, like, driving off into the mist, like the story does, whatever. And everybody has their favorite that's like this. Now, here's my question. Number one, if we hate the ending of something, does the whole movie get an F, or does the whole movie get graded down to become, it's a C but only because of the ending, or is it's an A but skip the ending? I mean, how do we?
I think it depends on how good the rest of the movie is, because Mark of the Vampire, which is a Bela Lugosi film that I really like.
Absolutely, yeah.
This dismisses all of the stuff as part of this ridiculously elaborate attempt to capture, there were never any real vampires. There's all this attempt to capture this murder.
Yeah.
And
it's all explained in about 4 minutes of screen time at the end. Yeah.
I still like that movie, but that's because I like the rest of the movie enough to forgive that.
Yeah. To essentially say the ending just didn't happen. And so here's my other question is if we the viewer are in a sense writing the film as we view it. If the movie essentially doesn't exist until it enters our brain through our eyes, then is there a way in which we can see the art as, is there a complete piece in our head that doesn't include the ending? In other words, why can't there be a viewer's cut of something, a fan edit that makes more sense and that is in a sense just as legitimate? I mean, I might be stretching. I'm not trying to bullshit. I'm really trying to grapple with this question of why, if you've invested so much into watching Star Wars, and you've come up with a better way to understand Star Wars and edit it together. I'm talking about Episode 1. and edit it together so it becomes a much better movie. Why isn't your vision as a super fan just as legitimate as the one from the director? I guess because the director's the director, but
yeah, the director's the director. But I think in some ways that's valid. I also liked when I was talking to Max about it. He kind of was like, well, his take on it was more that it was that ending was more of kind of a limbo kind of thing. So that they were and I was like, I thought that was an interesting take as well, except the guy died in the limbo part. But in general, I was like, that's kind of interesting, and it kind of softened a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I thought it was at first, but then I changed my mind and decided it was just.
Well, there's another example of a thing that does that. It's Lost. You know how Lost ends.
Holy crap!
Despite all the protestations,
exactly.
despite all the protestations throughout the entire series, no, they weren't dead. Of course, they were dead.
I hate the last episode of Dexter, but I like pretty much everything else about it. So. I mean, again, I think it goes back to how much you like the rest. Like Tony was saying, with this flick, he was perfectly happy, just to turn it off before it gets the little epilogue.
Yeah.
I'm okay with it.
You should probably make a list. Go ahead, Tim.
I like escapism as much as the next person, but I was okay with a heroic battle that ends in sacrifice in the small village.
Sure.
Yeah, like
Absolutely.
that's how Angel. That's how the series Angel ends.
Actually, Joss Whedon disagrees with me, and I guarantee you he's more right than I am, because I watched the ending of Angel, and I was like, well, clearly all of them die in the next minute or so. And Whedon was like, I can't believe people watched that and thought that I was intending that everybody died. Now, I don't know if Joss is just pulling our leg because he's decided to write comic books, or because I watched that.
Well, there was going to be another season of Angel, and they got canceled. So the comic book series that has the Hell on Earth in Los Angeles is actually what the last season of Angel
that's amazing to me.
Was intended to be, and we just never got it. That's a really cool comic book series, by the way, if you haven't read it.
I believe you. I mean, but I thought we were looking at Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. I thought they were dead.
Well, I mean, certainly that's the way they shot it, that's because they had no choice.
Yeah.
Anyway,
also,
I think I'm going to forget by next week how this movie ended, so I don't really think it matters. But the rest of it, is really interesting to me, and I'm glad that we watched it. And
Tony,
that's my closing thoughts, by the way. You don't need to come back to me.
Oh, okay, all right. So we'll call that the first final thoughts. Why don't we get the rest of them? We'll go Tony, Drew, and then I'll say something, and then we'll come around for endorsements. So. Wow, what a fun conversation. Tony, what are your final thoughts about Rigor Mortis and kicking off this, what are we going to see? I mean, not necessarily what titles, but what kind of thing do we have to look forward to in this retrospective?
Well, definitely Mr. Vampire. I think we have a handle on it now.
Yeah.
Vulcan Video has it, which if you're not one of us, please don't rent it so that Drew can rent it. However, we have it worked out. But it is the Mr. Vampire.
Somehow somebody rents it, I'm going to have to go to your house and watch it.
Yeah, somehow the powers that be have let Mr. Vampire fall into out-of-printness in a major way, which is sad.
Astonishing. Yeah.
The whole series is fun, even though it does get really ridiculous. Like I said, eventually there's one where a small child vampire hangs out with kids and they bring him around like E.T., and go to a theme park with their. I mean, it goes. But the first Mr. Vampire, I think, really sets the tone for some really awesome. It's a good action comedy mix. This one in particular, I think, I wish that we weren't flip-flopping it, because one of the things about this is the nostalgia of seeing all these people who have been in supernatural horror movies, Asian horror movies, Chinese specifically, seeing them kind of reprising their roles or coming back or bringing things back around. That's part of the charm of this movie. It may not be if you haven't seen those previous movies, and that, so it does suffer a little bit. It also, does count on you being familiar with this stuff. So this, again, isn't for everybody. I really enjoyed it. I got a really kind of visceral thrill seeing a lot of my favorite actors come back, even though there's not much comedy in this. It's definitely, like I said, a more deliberate movie, definitely a more brutal movie than previous outings. But I really enjoyed it. In fact, I may have enjoyed it more this third time than I did the second time I saw it. Although every time, like I said, I always forget at what point I should stop the movie. But I had to watch all of it, to talk about it for the podcast. So now I have a better handle on that.
Sure.
I think the effects, they're not my favorite. I still, having seen previous movies where they use practical effects, even though they use a lot of, I wish they'd use practical effects along with this really dreamy cinematography. I think the cinematography is fantastic. I think it's interesting, the palette that they chose. And if you have seen previous Chinese vampire movies especially, I think this is one you'll really dig because of, that nostalgia factor as well. If you haven't, definitely, your mileage may vary. So with that, I would lead to Drew.
You know, I did not enjoy the movie. I'm not going to go back and try and retroactively say, oh no, I liked it, you know, because I didn't. But I did enjoy talking about it. It's been a fun movie to talk about, and you know, especially talking about the Chinese folklore and everything. And that is something that I'm looking forward to getting more into with this retrospective, because I feel like it'll broaden my horizon some as a horror fan. And you know, I've seen my fair share of Chinese and Japanese horror films, but not a lot. I'm certainly not anywhere close to being as into it as Tony is. So this is something that should be interesting to see. And I am really looking forward to Mr. Vampire. I was disappointed that we were unable to nail it down for this week. So I'm looking forward to getting into it next week.
Yeah, so people who like the podcast, if you're wondering what the heck is going on, you can fully blame Tony. It's all me. I've been waiting about a year for this retrospective, so I hope that you'll humor me as we go through this. And we're trying.
Well, they should broaden their horizons too. They should broaden their horizons too.
I think people are really going to enjoy reaching into this world. And Tony, just in the same way that Drew, I don't know anybody who knows Universal or Friday the 13th as well as Drew does. I don't know anybody who knows Asian cinema, much less Asian horror, as well as you do. So I think it's.
Oh man,
really
I know some. My friend Mark, as well as Grady Hendricks and several others. Dan, I don't want to get his name wrong. I know a bunch of people who know way more than me, but I appreciate that. I guess in this circle, I'll be okay. But yeah, there's a you know, I have to give shout out to my contemporaries who are true scholars.
I'm telling you though, I've never known an expert at anything who, when asked about his expertise, doesn't always name like 3 or 4 other people who can run sources. That is the nature of expertise.
Yeah, I mean, you're an expert on the experts. That makes you an expert.
But
that means you can put together a crack team of experts.
Now that I can do. That I feel very confident that if I had to put together a panel to debate and maybe even possibly fight Chinese vampires, I feel pretty good that I could get together that team. I like the image of guys debating against a Chinese vampire.
No, I like the idea of a bunch of horror movie geeks suddenly becoming like Chinese vampire fighters.
That actually would be really good.
I've always said if I ever run afoul of Dracula, I'm calling Jason.
Right? Yeah. No, I mean, think about this. Like, okay, you've got a writers' conference going on in, I don't know, Duluth or something like that, and you've got
this is like Fire Shark. You got to write this.
A panel of expert writers about Chinese ghost story. A bunch of, you know, and some of them are like grizzled old vets who used to work for famous monsters and haven't had a job in years. You know, and
even better is you're going to have kind of what we were talking about before the podcast is you're going to have this dick waving contest. About, no, you fight the vampires this way. Oh, contraire, here's this previous thing. Don't know. Is running water, you know, that whole thing.
Yeah, but what they don't know is that Duluth is also playing host to, some art gallery that's having a whole bunch of, rare Chinese, you know, sculpture and stuff. And something stupid happens, and you know, vampires are loose, and now our panelists, you know, including Jeff Roven of Famous Monsters, are going to have to go kill, you know, these vampires. Anyway, you know, we got to get Carrie Gamble in there, going, I couldn't draw the hell out of this. Anyway, all right. I have nothing else to say about this. I really love this, and I'm looking forward to the next one. And we will find. I've got Mr. Vampire now. We're ready to discuss it, and I think we will turn it into a good thing that we're going backwards. Let's do endorsements. I totally want to hear about what people want to talk about. Tony, are you ready to tell us anything that has been particularly intriguing in the past week?
Oh man,
I can come back around.
And now, yeah, come back around to me because there was something and now I can't remember.
Yep.
I'm silly.
Drew, do you have anything to endorse?
My wife and I have started watching Bates Motel season 2 on Netflix. I've actually actively. Huh?
I've never seen a single episode of Bates Motel. Is it? I mean,
the kid playing Norman Bates and the woman playing Vera Farmiga, or however the hell you pronounce her last name. She was in The Conjuring. The two of them are great. Like they elevate. The rest of the show is just that. Like I was actually actively complaining about this earlier on Facebook because I think anytime it's about the two of them, it is such a fascinating show. And the kid in particular, he's not aping Anthony Perkins, but he's just a pitch perfect what you would imagine Norman Bates would be like as a teenager. So, they're great. I wish the rest of the show, the show's got, the second season's got this subplot about warring marijuana drug lords, and I just the show needs to be less Breaking Bad, more Dexter. I don't know who thought, because I like mafia stuff, I like crime stuff, but when I'm watching a show about Norman Bates, I want to watch a show about teenage lunatic.
Well, I mean, a teenage lunatic, or at the very least, teenage perv. I mean, the most interesting thing about Norman is his sexual transgressions.
Well, they just now started getting more into that, and like I said, he's great. The kid is such an absolute joy to watch, and I'm a fan of not just the Psycho film, but I kind of hoping they'll get into some of the psychology from the novel, because there's certainly unused territory that could be would serve well for television. So even though the show is kind of a mixed bag, if you're a fan of Psycho, I think you will get some enjoyment out of it, simply because the performances of the two leads are just so damn good.
Well, interesting. Really interesting. All right. Maybe someday, any day now, I may give that a shot. Julia, what about you?
Well, we watched The Imitation Game last week, finally, and I thought that was a really great story. I always enjoy Benedict Cumberbatch. I'm a big Sherlock fan, and he's really interesting. But mostly, I just didn't know the story of Alan Turing. I hadn't become familiar with it. So just that whole business of creating this machine that could decode all the German messages, decode Enigma, and how important that was, and how it was a secret for 50 years. And then this poor man who's this, homosexual in a time when that was just not okay. It's not even all that okay in some places now. And how tortured he was about that. And it's just a really interesting story. So, I recommend it to anyone who hasn't gotten a chance to see it yet.
Very cool. So I actually had a good experience. I listened to two stories by Daphne du Maurier, both of which are horror movies, one of which we've actually done on the show. So I listened to an audiobook of Peter Capaldi, who's actually the new doctor on Doctor Who, reading Don't Look Now and The Birds by Daphne du Maurier, which is great because he has this very genteel British accent, and
he's actually Scottish.
Oh, he's Scottish. Well, okay, very good. Yes, I mean, but he sounds so lovely, and he's perfect for du Maurier's work. And anyway, he does the story of the birds, and the birds I found, because we did an episode on the birds. Birds, very, very different, and maybe I'm naive for even being shocked by this, but the story of the birds by Daphne du Maurier is very different from the story that was published, that Hitchcock made. And that what's most odd to me is that the birds, the story is about the Blitz, really. It's, the birds themselves are thinly veiled symbols of invaders from other countries. And, and how when they start invading, you have to start making new rules, and it's very dreary because it's dangerous, but you also have just regular habits. And it's about this one guy who, over the course of the story only covers about 24 hours in almost real time. One guy, just starts to make up new rules on how he's going to deal with the birds and how he's going to fortify and what kind of supplies he needs to get, and it's a completely down to earth allegory for the London Blitz and the fear later of invaders from, say, Russia. And that's not in the movie at all. And Hitchcock's a British person. I mean, so it's not as though Hitchcock didn't understand what du Maurier was doing, but it's interesting to me that when Hitchcock decided to make his movie 10 or 11 years after the story came out, he jettisoned all of that. He wasn't interested in that, and instead he created a very strange story in The Birds that we spent a good, fun hour and a half talking about. So that was fascinating. And I'll save talking about Don't Look Now until we actually do the movie, which we should do sometime. So anyway, I really recommend that you listen to The Birds by Daphne du Maurier, narrated by Peter Capaldi. Cool. Tony, did you have anything that you wanted to endorse?
Yeah, a couple things. I think in general, now that I think about it, I just urge people to see some Asian horror that is before The Ring. Like, don't start at The Ring. Go before that. There's Encounters of the Spooky Kind. There's Chinese Ghost Story. There's lots of stuff out there that's really awesome and cool, and you can read about that on the internet as well to kind of supplement what you don't know. I also will have to say that if anybody is in Austin this weekend, actually Friday, Deserts of Mars is playing, and it is celebration of my birthday, as well as Anthony from this other band, Diguelo, that's playing. And so that's going to happen at the Lost Well. So if you are a fan and you're in Austin and you want to come out and see Deserts of Mars and celebrate, have a birthday rock shindig, that will be happening. So that's what we're doing.
Will we be doing our next, your birthday's the 25th or 24th?
24th, but the gig's on the 20th, this Friday.
Yeah, but will we be doing our podcast on your birthdays or anything?
Maybe?
Close to it, anyway. We'll be able to wish you a birthday then.
Yeah.
I'll wait till then to wish you a birthday.
Awesome.
Very cool.
Before we go, I forgot to, when I was doing my endorsements, I forgot to give a shout out to the Austin Horror Society. I went to their showing of Friday the 13th, Part 3 in 3D last Friday.
I'm sad I missed that.
It was a lot of fun. I mean, the 3D effect, they were doing it off of a home video instead of a print, so the 3D effect was not perfect. But that is the first Friday the 13th movie I ever saw. I saw it in 3D when it first came out at a drive-in, so it was fun. Jamie had never seen it before, so it was kind of fun to introduce her to the movie that way, and make some new friends. So I definitely going to be going to more of their events because it was just so much fun.
Yeah, they are awesome. That is a cool group of people. Really, that's a great group, and I was really sad that I haven't been able to go out to more stuff, and B, didn't really know about the group until this past year, which I don't even know how that happened. But I'm trying to catch up where I can. So. Well, they're
doing next month. They're doing Friday the 13th Part 2 at Spider House. You and I should go.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, we should. Yeah, we should try to do that.
Mm-hmm.
That'd be awesome.
Castle Horror represent.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's about enough. This has been a supersized episode, but I think it was well worth it because this is a fun topic. We will be back next week with more Chinese horror. Take Tony's advice, but if you want to get ahead of our conversation, don't just watch anything from Before the Ring. Watch Mr. Vampire, and I challenge you all to find it. And if you find it,
don't take the only copy
don't rent it. Don't rent it from Vulcan.
If you live in Austin and you find it,
I will come to your house with Vampire.
Glutinous rice and a lot of bloody, imprinted paper, so we can pin it to your forehead.
If you were programmed, if you were going to watch Mr. Vampire at your own personal Alamo Draft House, what would you? I guess you'd serve like rice balls and like some kind of something to do with. You'd want that crinkly paper as well. I don't know what you'd do with it. I guess you can put those in dumplings. I mean, dumplings are on that. Anyway, so we'll think about like what our fantasy menu would be to go with this. Everybody, thank you. Those of you coming from Bleeding Cool, we're very happy that you're here, and we're so happy that you guys continue to visit with us. Those of you coming from Facebook, we are so happy to hear from you every week, and I encourage you to visit one another. Those of you who are listening, we do answer questions over at the Facebook page all the time. I also check Bleeding Cool, but if you want to hear from us fast, we just sort of hang out on the Facebook page because that's how we roll. And we would love to hear your comments, your questions, your arguments, your debates, your reviews on iTunes. That's really, really a big deal. And as always,
if you fight Chinese vampires, let us know that.
Let us know. And we'd also, love to know how you actually are finding the show. Like, where do you listen to it? On your cell phone, what have you. And that's it. Thanks, everybody. Thank you for your patience and for your love. We will see you soon. Bye.
Good night, everybody.
Thanks.
Good night.